living in the moment, and the moment is the future.
Welcome to Sped Talk with Pam
and John,
also known as The Calm.
Before the Storm.
Our purpose is to elevate the conversation and amplify special education resources.
And our why is about making the impossible possible.
Right now, there's so much hope, so much positivity, so much change. In special ed, for years, we complained, I want change. I don't want this. I want that. You know what? It's happening, and it's difficult. Never fun, but at the same time, you can see the change happening in real time. So Sped Talk is just a chance for us to elevate others. It's just about people like yourself coming on. Y'all are the stars, not us.
No. We appreciate it for sure.
I have to say, I'm new to TEA relatively, and so I hadn't heard of the podcast, and I was feeling a little nervous. So I was like, all right, I'm going to listen to all the episodes. And I was like, wow, these people are so nice. This sounds fun. You guys certainly have a really awesome thing going. So I'm super happy to be here as well.
Well, that's great. Well, I mean, we're super excited to be sharing, the context here that we're talking about today it's an interesting opportunity for us on Sped Talk because, we do the networks, but, the SD grant, that dips into that world of, those difficult conversations, those topics that we need to address. Well, I'll let you guys go on about that. But I felt like this was a great opportunity to show and really kind of highlight that connection between TEA, AIR, and, as liaisons, a few of us in those first couple of years really had the opportunity to come out to AIR and have liaison weekly meetings there. We just love the organization, love that research-based approach that y'all take, and just are fans of AIR. And so for TEA and AIR and this important thing, this significant disproportionality that we're trying to address, what a great time to have you on.
Absolutely.
Well, with us today, we have Leah Baldessari from TEA. We've got Stacy Benson, also with TEA, and we have Sarah Benz from AIR, which is the American Institute for Research. So could you tell us a little bit about yourselves and a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I can start if that would be helpful. So obviously I'm Sarah Benz. I'm currently a researcher at American Institutes for Research. People call us AIR or AIR, whichever is fine. We all know what you're talking about. And I was a middle school teacher, a special education teacher for about 5.5 years in Ohio, I did rural setting, and then I swung the pendulum and went right to an urban downtown Columbus. So I have both of those experiences. Really saw Ohio had a big push at that point for all teachers to get a master's degree. And so I said, well, I'm going to go back to get my master's. So I did at Vanderbilt University, really focusing on inclusion, the research on inclusion and students with emotional behavior disorders. I got out, thought I was too cool to be a teacher, decided to try my hand at being a district administrator of special education, and wore a few different hats. So I was a special ed director, preschool director, and the 504 coordinator for a district. Again, learned a lot, at every level. It broadens a little bit more, right? Your view of special education. So awesome experience. Really wanted to take it up a notch, decided to go back and get my PhD. There was only one natural choice to do that. That was the University of Texas at Austin, got my PhD there, and pretty much been at AIR ever since.
Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Spent some time teaching there and decided to make the move to Texas in 2000. So I've been here ever since. So now I call Texas home. During that time, I've been a special education teacher, and then around 2009, I decided to move into central office. Most of my experience has been in large urban districts. Specifically started around transition services, served as a itinerant teacher and moved up to the supervisor of transition services in the district that I was in. Then I also moved up to the director of curriculum and instruction, where I really worked on.
So I've been there since 2017 and have developed just a love and a fondness for Texas Education Agency and all the good things and the great work that's coming out of there. So, so the love is the same. So I'll let Leah and Stacy introduce themselves.
I'm Stacy Vincent. I have about 23 years in education, all in special education. So I started out my career in Oklahoma, graduated from how to implement those accommodations and modifications and those supports in the general education classroom as well as specialized classrooms. During that time, I also went back and got my master's at the University of North Texas in the area of emotional behavior disorders. And then I decided to take a chance and move out to El Paso, and I served as the assistant superintendent of special education and special services for 1.5 years out there, where I was over health services as well as special education services and Section 504. So then I decided to move back. I've been taking a tour of Texas, and so I moved back to Austin, and I've been here at TEA about 2.5 years, Department of Review and Support.
Yeah, wow. I already knew it was really awesome to get to work so closely with Sarah and Stacy, but just hearing them detail their breadth of experience, I'm like, wow, I'm in a really lucky position to be able to work so closely with them. I don't have nearly as much experience in special education as they do, but I'm super excited to learn from them throughout this process. But I'm Leah Baldessare. I'm one of the point people for the SD grant on the TEA side. And I am actually at TEA through a fellowship called Leadership for Educational Equity. And so they placed me with TEA in this department. It's an organization that works to get former educators into education policy. And so I am originally from North Carolina, but I did start my teaching career in Dallas, and I taught kindergarten and first grade and bilingual first grade there for several years. And then I moved to Mexico City, actually, and I taught for 2 years there. And that's kind of when I really got much more interested in special education, because the school I was working at was really focused on being an inclusive environment and, you know, just kind of having a really heavy emphasis on inclusion and supporting children with learning challenges and disabilities or otherwise diverse needs, always from within the general education classroom. So I kind of got that lens on when I was there. And then I moved back to the US to get my master's in public policy from Duke University, which is where I'm from, Durham, North Carolina. And while I was there, I worked part-time at another school that was really focused on differentiated instruction for students with learning and attention challenges. And so I kind of continued to learn about special education through that. And when I graduated with my MPP, I got placed in special education programs at TEA. So I was really excited because, you know, this role working on significant disproportionality in Texas feels so important and just really marries kind of my desire to work towards racial equity in schools and also to continue to learn about how we can support students with disabilities. So I feel super lucky to be in this position and to be working with Sarah and Stacy and on this grant. So thanks for having me.
We're lucky to have you, Leah. And I'll tell you, you know, experience is one of those things. We make connections, we transfer skills. And so, you know, as humans, we connect with one another and we are exposed to individuals with varying abilities in the community and everywhere we go. And so I feel like often we need the novel perspective, the you know, newer practitioners to come into the field, into these areas, and to really, you know, help those of us that have been around in the field maybe a bit longer to kind of think a little differently and try some different approaches. And so we're blessed to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us. So Jennifer, jump in.
We do have some questions for you. So tell us a little bit about AIR and how this relationship between AIR and TEA came to exist.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about the background on AIR, and then I'll let Leah kind of field the other part. But so American Institutes for Research is pretty much a not-for-profit. We've been around since I think the 40s or 50s. So we've been around for a while, and we kind of span, really we focus in kind of 2 areas: education, both domestic and international, which I think is just super cool. And then we really kind of dip our toe into health research and communication as well. So over the years, we have actually established quite a few offices. And recently we established an office in Austin in 2015. And so, you know, really kind of what we see as the real benefit from partnering with like an organization, like sort of for TEA to partner with an organization like AIR, is that we really are like this research organization. So we really bring kind of like the most up-to-date research. And then we also have this awesome lens of like all these national projects that we work on, and we can bring that experience to Texas to say, you know, yes, we have done it this way and we know it's going to be how give you the best bang for your buck, or you know what, we've tried it that way and actually it's going to be a disaster. So we have kind of like, and then we're able to cross lines, right? So I work with TEA and special education, but so many more of my colleagues hit TEA at different levels. And so we're really able to say, you're doing a project with TEA, what's going on there? Now from this end, I can say, this is how we can align, right? And so we are helping state organizations to then unsilo. So that's what I see as kind of a benefit of working with a place like AIR. Leah, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that, you know, this is a new grant, as you all know, which is why you brought us on. I think, you know, it was just awarded in 2020. And, you know, as I understand it, it was kind of created in the wake of the 2016, you know, the federal government kind of doing some rulemaking with respect to significant disproportionality, which made some changes to the SD regulations, including kind of standardizing the methodology that states use to calculate SD and kind of clarifying that, you know, states need to provide for the review and, if applicable, the revision of policies and procedures at the LEA level when there's SD, and, you know, that LEAs need to identify and address what's the factors contributing to SD. And so I think, you know, Stacey's department has been working really hard to do that measurement with the new standard methodology for several years. And, you know, since it takes until, you know, there's SD1, SD2, and SD3. And at that point, we kind of have some data right now in Texas. And I think TEA really recognized this kind of systems change where districts need to really do, you know, introspection and really thinking through and digging into policies and procedures and practices that might be getting in the way of making equitable identification or placement or discipline decisions. Like, that's really hard and it takes a lot of work. And, you know, we want to be able to support LEAs as best as possible. So that, I think that was really the thought behind the grant is, you know, how can we provide a really best in class opportunity for LEAs to engage with this really difficult and challenging work, and, you know, be there for them and have an opportunity for them. And, you know, the great thing about partnering with AIR is they have a lot of experts in systems change and significant disproportionality, years and years of experience, as far as I'm aware, which is really cool. And those people are working on this project and they just have a real breadth of knowledge and expertise. So I think that's one of the huge benefits that we get from working with AIR, you know, to the extent that there's districts that really want to partner with them to get coaching and long-term support. That's what we're going to be able to offer with AIR. So I think it's really awesome that this partnership is happening and really hope that it continues to develop over the next long time.
You know, it's great hearing that the SD grant comes with those supports and those services, the embedded supports, the coaching, the kind of that ongoing relationship, because you're right about it's hard to, self-analysis is very difficult. And I think some of us do it better and some not so much. But it's difficult when you're in a system and you're a member of that system to diagnose maybe why that system is getting the results it's getting. You know, some people metacognate very well, some not so much. And so, you know, I think in any system, temptation a lot of times is if you're a leader is to try to pull a lever, try to impose a practice, try to, without first kind of getting in and understanding the system and then becoming, you know, removing yourself from the system. And so often we miss opportunities to do that because we're within that system trying to change the system from within without looking out, without those strategic partnerships, interagencies and such. And so I love that through AIR and TEA, this SD grant will come with, like you said, that kind of best in class, if you will, that embedded supports to really take on SD versus just have additional monies to address SD, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like really important to remember, like nobody goes into, you know, working with students and say, yeah, I'm going to do things that are going to cause significant disproportionality. Like that is absolutely not the case. Everybody's working extremely hard to offer extreme equitable and, you know, really great education here in Texas. And so it's just exactly what you're saying, John, about, whoa, maybe we need to zoom out because there's so many nuances and so many complicated pieces that form together to create the situation in which you know, we might have outcomes that we want to work on. And so I think that's a great point. So thanks for saying that.
And it brings to bear the history, right? Like we have all these compliance things that we do, right? Like we got to notify parents, we got to do X, we got to do Y. But when you really dig into the history of why these kind of indicators came out, there are landmark cases that just break your heart as to why now we have this trickle down effect of like compliance, right? And I think it's important to remind people these are not rules that are just in place to have something to monitor. I'm sure Stacy's office could really say we don't need anything else to monitor, but it's because of inequitable outcomes and inequitable practices that have been practiced since the forever, right? But really coming to light in the 70s. And I think when you stop to think about that, it's like, yeah, we accidentally are doing the same thing just in a different way now. And I think if we can call that attention, it seems less compliance and more like we really have to change our system in a lot of ways.
I'd just like to add on to that, coming from the monitoring piece, you know, significant disproportionality is not a non-compliance indicator. When we set those 15%, it's really looking at that equity across across students and that gap. And so when we're looking at LEAs, they're reviewing LEAs that have significant disproportionality, sometimes those data pieces are adding to areas of noncompliance that indicate that noncompliance indicator. And so that's where we come in. But we're also able to provide that outside perspective and bring in some universal supports or even some targeted supports to those LEAs. And like you said, have maybe a little fresh way of thinking of things when you're knee deep in the work. Sometimes it's hard to have that outside perspective.
Absolutely. And so, you know, I think that's the thing with significant disproportionality. Many of these things are these abstract concepts that occur, and we track lag data a lot of times at the local district in ways that we don't have real time ability to, or we don't feel like we do. So sometimes it's difficult to take an abstract concept and then that want to use a different path, that want a different approach, to be able to take the research base and then apply it to real-time data and then potentially pivot in practice. And so, you know, it's just great that AIR is partnering in this way, because I think AIR really substantiates the work that TEA is doing through that research-based lens.
So really districts that employ the use of or deploy the services of AIR are going to receive intensive training and coaching to kind of, again, as we've talked about, identify and really remediate those systemic issues that are related to effective and equitable services for not just students with disabilities. This is aimed at students with disabilities, but those systemic issues will impact all of their students to improve outcomes. And so districts are going to be able to learn from experts in the field through AIR. They will have the opportunity to come to learn more about how to do a root cause analysis. What are those best practices or evidence that we have from research that says these are good levers to be able to pull to make disproportionality lessened? And looking at policies and practices and how all of those kind of come together to sometimes create this really imperfect, I want to say perfect storm, but it's not a perfect storm, but to kind of perpetuate those systemic issues. So we're going to do a lot of training and coaching with the schools. They also, again, as I mentioned, you know, I think what AIR really brings to the table is direct access to these national experts that are out there, you know, making their lives work about disproportionality. So really districts that partner with us will have that up-to-date research. And then excitingly, I think as we pivoted to virtual, we saw how when we went virtual, we all became siloed in the need for a community. And so really relying on communities of practices. And so districts will be a part of a bigger group of districts that are all in this same boat together and talking about problems of practice. You know, when I come to the table and I say, Leah, we have a problem, you know, she brings a different lens and we are able to kind of talk through like, well, this is what I did. We're kind of taking that on a bigger scale for districts and for them to be able to come together and kind of talk through those problems of practice in a structured way. So again, really having that training, coaching, and the community of practice. And then we're also starting kind of this other side, right? To be able to develop kind of a sustainable system of Texas-based personnel. Like AIR is awesome, but we want to impart the knowledge and the research on Texas-based personnel. And so really trying to provide that at the ESC level and really partnering with our ESC personnel to do that. And so while this year we're going to be able to provide a train the trainer throughout the grant cycle, but this year we're really focused on kind of a smaller group, trying some things out, training an ESC cadre, and then hopefully we can expand that into bigger, make it bigger, invite more ESC personnel to be trained. And again, just investing in Texas-based people to have that knowledge. We don't want to be the keepers of the knowledge by any sense of the imagination. So passing that on to Texas-based personnel was another thing that we were really, I think TEA has been in with us saying this is important work for you to do.
I like hearing the design thinking there, the little bets, the starting small. Like we want to continue to iterate. When we land on it, then we'll begin to scale, but then reiterate as we go. And so I love that, and I know AIR is all about that. And so I think about that strategic partnership that you have with TEA, and I think about how I wonder to what degree will like the Division of Review and Support play with this. Will there be a connection between things like the reviews that are going on around the cyclical and the reviews going on, or how will that tie in?
Definitely, John. We're specifically this school year, 2021, we're specifically looking at SD through our targeted reviews. So we do have 2 monitoring tracks, cyclical and targeted. And so our LEAs that are in that targeted area that have those determination levels, 3s and 4s with SD year 3, are going to go through that on-site process, where we're actually, you guys talked about the policies and procedures, where we're going to be delving into what are their practices, how are they implementing those policies within their LEAs, because a lot of times that's where we're seeing some gaps. You have this written down, but is it being implemented with fidelity? And like you said before, John, are they reviewing their data in real time? Because we do get that lag data. And so it's important for us to have those conversations with administrators to talk about what is the practice occurring and what is the current data. And is it, are we seeing better student outcomes, or are we seeing the disproportionality increase? And if so, how can we step in and identify some targeted supports for your LEA? So that's how review and support is addressing significant disproportionality at this time.
Yeah, that's great that you mentioned that, and systems work really is trend analysis. We're looking at year-over-year data. We're trying to, in some ways, predict. Trying to at least correlate action with change. And so I love that TEA has kind of taken a stance that, listen, we've got a lot of lag data. There's all this big data. Data isn't real actionable if you can't see it. We want to make it actionable. And so I love that TEA has taken on really the cause of creating so many resources for schools to begin to collect, and respond to, such as the formative assessment and different things tied to STAR that we, and so I think that's important. And I think this is another example of TEA really trying to just help schools have the resources they need to do the work being asked to do.
And I think it's also addressed through our self-assessment that we've created in review and support that all LEAs will engage in this year. And so some of those questions, it's a self-reflection tool on your practices and how we can achieve better student outcomes. So having those guiding questions to lead LEAs through that data review process and just reviewing their practices and the implementation, I think is also helpful for those LEAs that may not be in cyclical or targeted reviews, but may have some areas of SD that they need to address prior to getting to that, year 3 SD status. Another thing that we're doing is Leah and I definitely collaborate a lot along with our ESC facilitators that are working on trainings to roll out through the ESCs on significant disproportionality as well as root cause analysis, just to ensure that we're all aligned on that we're all talking the same talk, we're all implementing the same type of questions and practices around that root cause analysis, and just laying the groundwork for what is SD, because sometimes that needs to be addressed as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight exactly that. And, going back to Sarah talking through all the services that AIR is going to be offering to districts, one thing that I think is important is that, and I think, Sarah, you described this really nicely earlier, is like, this isn't an AIR dip in, dip out. And I think that's a really cool piece to these services, is that, AIR is going to be working with districts for as long as they need. It's not a training and then we're gone. But that being said, there are a lot of districts, frankly, that are working through these things. And, AIR might not be consulting with all of the SD3 districts at a time. And so that's why I think it's really important that we do align with Stacey's work that she's doing. And we're working really hard to make sure that, if a district works with AIR and then at some point they're getting a targeted review with Stacey's team, or maybe they're not getting either of those things, but they're working with their liaison who, knows a lot about SD and is working on root cause analysis with them, we're all speaking the same language. We're looking at the same tools. We're using the self-assessment that they've already, filled out for TEA, and we're really able to kind of just really align on what are we talking about, what are those practices, so that if you're an LEA, that you're working through this, again, over a long period of time. This isn't just something that's going to change in, 1 year of working on this. And so no matter where you're getting your support or who you're working with at this moment in time, we're all kind of in this together in terms of what we're working with LEAs on, and the language that we're using, exactly like Stacey said. So that's another thing that Stacey and I have really been excited about, is our partnerships with the ESC liaisons, who have a lot of knowledge about SD and who are really excited about working with LEAs that come to them, because as Sarah was mentioning, that's the regional contact. And so I just think it's really cool that we're able to all align on these things and make sure that we're kind of putting forth a cohesive set of supports for LEAs between review and support, AIR, and ESC work in this area. So that's something that we hope to continue doing, and I think will be really important moving forward.
Leah, you made the comment as far as AIR working with the SD3 districts, and then liaisons working with the other districts that choose to have work done. Is AIR going to focus solely on the SD3, or are there other, are they open to working with anyone who's needing or wanting that support?
Yeah, Jennifer, I think that's a really good question. So I think, the RFP came out to really talk about those intensive needs districts, right? Those SD3 schools. So, but we kind of on the same line see it in kind of a three-pronged attack, if you will. We will be continuing to work intensively with those SD3 schools over the life of the grant, but then also on the side, producing universal resources, and at some point get to a point where we're doing targeted technical assistance as well. So, right, we're doing the hard work at the SD3 schools, but trying to put out services and resources that didn't prevent the SD3 from continuing to be funneled that way. So this year, it really is, we are kind of charged with, continuing to stop the bleed, if you will, if that's a good way to say it, but really get to those schools that have the SD3, but also on the side, continue to work to produce those universal and targeted resources and technical assistance avenues. Leah, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Sarah. And I think that, right now we've talked a little bit about how AIR is going to be, especially at the beginning, really reaching out to LEAs to participate in this. And the target group for that right now is LEAs that are SD3 and have a determination level for the other SPED monitoring pieces of 1 or 2. And that's specifically one of the reasons for that is because Stacy's team is going to be also working with LEAs that are SD3, but determination levels 3 and 4. So trying to kind of make sure that we're covering, you know, a lot of the different situations that LEAs might be in. And I think the AIR services are opt-in services. There's probably not going to be a world in which we say, wow, there's an SD2 LEA that's really interested in working with AIR because, you know, they just really have the desire and they really think that those services would be right for them. You know, I don't think it's going to be a no, you're not allowed kind of situation. But we really are trying, especially at first, to have AIR target that particular group. And, you know, I think we all hope that as this grows and as our capacity grows, that we can include more and more LEAs with different determination levels and SD levels, just exactly to get at what Sarah said, which is working on prevention and strengthening just general education services and intervention so that problems of SD don't develop to the extent that school would, LEA, excuse me, would be in SD3. Does that answer the question a little bit, Jen?
Yes, it does. It does. So you'd mentioned that the grant was awarded in 2020. What is the length of the grant? What are we, is there a termination to it, or is this going to be an ongoing project? What is the vision for this grant and what, as far as its future?
Well, I will try to convey what I think the team at TEA would say to that question. You know, I think the vision is that we would really like to have this kind of technical assistance support available for the long term. So I think that the grant is technically recompeted in 5 years. And so I think the hope is that, you know, this continues after those 5 years, another 5 years, another 5 years, so that there's not really a situation in which, you know, we have this initiative and then it goes away, but rather like we're creating an infrastructure for the state of Texas that can really persist in the long run. I know there's a couple of other states that have done something like this. I think California is one of them, but it really is something that hasn't been done a ton around this country, I think. And so we're really excited about kind of figuring out what does it look like for the state agency to provide an infrastructure of technical assistance in the area of significant disproportionality for good.
I love that you mentioned that. I know I've done some research on other states and where they're sitting as far as SD goes, and it's things you're describing as far as research-based, evidence-based supports and things like that for LEAs. And California was one that I landed on. They've got a Padlet with some resources they've developed that are like, hey, in the absence of resources, here's some stuff you can use that we believe will, you know, based on national standards and stuff. So it's kind of neat to hear that it sounds like, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like what you're saying is it could be that we're hoping through this over time, we evolve into that model that has those types of technical resources and supports built in for our schools.
Absolutely. I think that is definitely the vision for the future. California has a great platform that has been really cool to look at.
And this may be kind of off the cusp, but let's say if I'm a director of special education for a shared services arrangement in Texas, and I'm in some smaller schools, you know, and I've got a group of schools that I'm the director for because our SSA supports 5 or 10 or however many small and rural schools. And I want to apply for this grant because 1 or 2 or multiple of my districts are SD. Would this be something that director for an SSA would apply for? Would it have to be the superintendent of the school that applies for it? And if the director was to apply for it, would they apply as an SSA or for each of the individual districts that might be SD Year 3?
That's a very specific question. So I will give my best at answering at what I think we would do. So at this point, we are really saying we are coming to districts, right? Like that's where we are starting. So if you're a district that is SD3, we are coming to you and then kind of working backwards from there. So if we have a district that has, you know, a special education director with multiple schools, we would definitely engage that person. They don't necessarily have to have all of their schools involved. And when we talk about that group, again, we are talking about district administrators this year. It is the hope that we are getting to the educator level and that we have this thing with families. Like the involvement of families from the IDEA perspective is there. It is a requirement that you're involving families, and we want to model that the same way. So I think to your question, we're kind of working backwards really, where we go to the LEAs and say, hey, you want some services, and then we let them kind of decide who is at the table to receive those services. But as you mentioned, like, we're not always going to stay at that district level, right? We continuously have to involve multiple stakeholders. So I don't know if that answered your question in the best of ways, but we have done a lot of work with those kind of shared service special education directors, and I think they also do a really great job at navigating that whole, like, well, I'm a SPED director over multiple schools, right? They do a really good job of navigating that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, they've got that 5 or 7 or 10 different political systems, that
That's
they have.
right. That's exactly right.
So, you mentioned something about I want to follow up with a clarifying question. You mentioned, like, the goal would be to like really engage parents and have kind of maybe an umbrella that all stakeholders kind of fall under, if you will. And so, has there been any consideration talk about maybe the potential of the way TEA and AIR partnered is maybe bringing in partners at some point, the statewide parent resource, that's also funded under IDEA, and figuring out if there's some way to have a connection to that through them, maybe? I don't know.
100%. I mean, I think, as you all know, there are varying levels of when you can get stakeholder feedback and engagement, right? You can go just to those stakeholder groups and say, hey, we just want your feedback on what we're doing. Really, the idea is to make those stakeholders, those parent groups at all levels, right? Like, Texas has CPACs. We have these parent groups. We want to engage parents to not only give us feedback on what districts are doing and the approach that we're taking and the resources that we're developing, but co-construct it with them. I think that is when you have the most palpable change. And we have seen that over years of doing this really difficult work. Even, when we just look at discipline, it is essential that when we talk about district policies, that we understand also how parents are perceiving those policies. Are parents part of that process, right? And so we can't do this work without engaging, like you're mentioning, John, those super important stakeholders that already have this kind of investment in Texas as well. And so we plan to involve them heavily at all levels. The CPACs, the state parent advisory councils, the networks for the parents. We plan to engage all of them to make sure that that parent voice is really not a secondhand kind of like back here thought, but to make sure that there is systemic change. We know we need them at the table. That's what we have seen from doing this work years and years.
That's so important. I love that y'all are doing that, and that's the goal. I would say the last stakeholder group, and maybe it's the first stakeholder group, is our students. And any way that we can get to the table and bring, I know there are schools out there now that are beginning to, what is it that you need versus, hey, this is what you need as far as education goes. And so I don't know. I always say it from the perspective of a parent. What I want for my children, regardless of ability, is I think what we should want for all children, regardless of ability. And so I love that you guys are taking that approach. And I know that child voice will be included along the way at some point, and in everything we do, probably.
Absolutely. And I think, going virtual has shown us the importance even more, really putting the exclamation mark on those student voices, because none of us received education virtually. And we are really seeing the value of saying, how is this impacting you and how can we do better for you? So I think, to your point, that student voice is essential. Again, asking them how they're experiencing these things. We have best laid plans, but really, what are the stakeholders experiencing? So yeah, great point.
Okay, Jennifer, I'll be quiet now.
Nope, you are good. You are absolutely good. Stacy, as far as review and support, I mean, I know with the reviews and the compliance parts of it, any advice from review and support as far as districts that are having to tackle SD and disparity and all of these other issues?
I think my word of advice would be to really utilize that self-assessment and really look at your policies and your practices, not only your policies, but really spend some time on the practices that you're utilizing. And like Sarah and John touched on, getting that stakeholder feedback as to how are parents, perceiving these procedures and policies, as well as our students and our teachers. Because in order for this to shift, the SD to shift, especially when you're in year 3, it's about a change of culture, and so that's going to take hearing from everyone's perspective. So I think I would be very open to listening to my stakeholders, my teachers, my parents, my students, going back and really looking at those policies as well as the practices and the fidelity of implementation of those practices, and how often are we having those conversations. Like John said, this is lag data that we're looking at. So a lot of times we're talking to districts and they already have something that they are focusing on, whether it's social emotional learning, restorative practices, MTSS, and they're really focused on those tiered levels of support for our students. So really going back to looking at what is your district practices, and how are you following them? How are they implemented? Are you implementing with fidelity? Are we having quarterly or semester data reviews on these items of SD, and seeing if we're making progress? And if not, you go back to that continuous improvement process and see what we can do to make changes. But those conversations and those data reviews are imperative to make change.
I want to let you know how much I appreciate that advice, because as people hopefully will listen to this and heed that advice, we struggle a lot with districts not wanting to have those hard conversations, with districts not wanting to follow through with the implementation of that school or that process. So I just hearing that from someone other than us as liaisons, I think is going to benefit tremendously, just because we're not the experts until you hear it from someone else. And so hearing you say that was just kind of affirmation of what the message we've tried to convey. Any final thoughts or any messages or anything that you, Leah, Sarah, would like to share with our listeners?
Just real quick, I just wanted to say thank you, Sarah, for bringing up forging ahead. We really want to see this, as I mentioned, as kind of a long-term thing, and everyone will just have to be a little patient with us this year as we're figuring it all out, because we're building a lot of stuff, and Sarah and her team are working incredibly hard, and Stacy and I are trying to kind of figure out what's already out there, because there's a lot of good work already being done. So, this year we're building the plane, and we are so excited to continue working on it with all the different people who are involved, so that we can build out something that's really sustainable and really can be supportive of LEAs for the long term. So we're really in the baby stages right now, and super excited to kind of see how the pilot goes and figure out what works. And so thank you so much for letting us talk a little bit about it on this show today. And we hope that, people start to get excited about this project that we hope lasts a long time. Oh, one more thing. Sarah just reminded me. When I was listening to the TSLAT episode of this, I think it was, and they were saying the website over and over again. It was really funny. And I was thinking, gosh, we do not have our website up and running. And I feel sad about that, but we will. And so we'll be pushing that out at some point as soon as we get it, all together. And until then, I did just want to say that folks can feel free to reach out to me if they have questions about the SD grant. My email is leah.baldassare@tea.texas.gov. And so I would be more than happy to take correspondence if people have questions about the grant, about what we're doing. So website coming soon is the moral of that story, and please feel free to reach out.
Okay, so Leah, before we wrap that up, let me please, if you would please repeat your email address and spell out your last name, please.
Yes, I will do that. So my email address is Leah, that's LEAH .Baldassare, that's BALDASARE @tea.texas.gov.
John, any closing thoughts?
It takes courage to get out there and to, speak to your passion and to share this information publicly. And so, from Sped Talk, if Pam was here, she'd say, listen, you're always welcome back in the future. If you're rolling out new ideas, courses, if you want to jump back on an episode of Sped Talk, just hit us up. We'd love to have you back. But I think most importantly, now you're Sped Talkers.
John, tell everyone how they can continue to elevate the conversation about special education in Texas.
You got it, Pam. They can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at SpedTalk 2020. Because in these disconnected times, connecting with others has never been so important. Now more than ever, it takes courage to create culture and kindness to keep us connected.
If you enjoyed this episode of Sped Talk, be sure to share it with a friend, because information should always flow through us, not to us. We couldn't do this without you, our listeners, and we need your help sharing the amazing transformation occurring in special education. Together, we can change the trajectory of learning opportunities in Texas for students with disabilities. If you have ideas, information, or resources that you think we should share on an upcoming episode of Sped Talk, let us know at Sped Talk 2020 on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. And be sure to like our page while you're there. Oh yeah, and if you get a chance, please consider giving us a positive review on the podcast platform that you listen to Sped Talk.
Living in the moment, and the moment is the future.
With the man, John.